now. So AGBO, she, her pronouns. I'm the policy and advocacy director with Spark. So I hold a lot of our just like legislative advocacy and campaign work. The vibes I'm bringing into the space today, if it doesn't show, a little like frazzled, but excited. I'm also actually going to a concert in Nashville tonight, so I'm very, very excited about that. And just happy to see that so many folks have joined us today. And I'll pass it off to whoever's on Spark staff who's ready.
I'm ready. Hey everyone, my name is Kay. I'm the lead organizer over at Spark. I am in Atlanta, and what I'm bringing to the space is openness to connect with folks, eager for folks to like take all the things in that we'll be talking about today, and yeah.
Hey y'all, my name's Asha. My pronouns are she, her. Sorry, my voice is a little but I am the community organizer for Spark, and the vibes that I'm bringing today, it feels very Sunday-ish for me, and so I'm giving Sunday morning easy vibes.
I can go. Hi, I'm KR. They, she. Are we talking about where we're at too? Okay, I'm on Cherokee land in Smyrna, Georgia. I'm the ED with Spark, and I put in the chat that I'm maybe bringing in my two little humans in and out of the meeting while I'm here. So I'm hoping to bring some cute faces to the meeting. I mean, we already have them, but you know, some additional little human cute faces.
I can go next. Nice to get on everyone. I am Elias. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the If, When, How Policy Fellow here at Spark. I'm zooming in today from ancestral Muskogee and Cherokee land in Atlanta. And I'm bringing like, I don't know, like breezy vibes.
Elias, you said greasy or breezy?
Breezy.
It's like
Yeah, breezy.
And I think we actually may have lost Aaron.
Okay, I can go. Hey everyone, sorry I'm not able to be on camera right now, but my name is Carter. I'm the operations coordinator with Spark. And I'm not sure what vibes I'm bringing today. I feel like light, fun, and like, I guess very weekend vibes. I'm bringing the weekend vibes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the communications manager at Spark. I apologize for being in the car. My Wi-Fi has been a mess, so I'm trying to get to another place that has better Wi-Fi. And as far as vibes, I'm bringing Saturday morning, excited vibes, but I still needed to grab a coffee. And I'm excited that you all are here with us.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And very, very grateful to Spark staff for joining on and making this possible as always. Like every year we put this on, and I know every year there's like various things that we have to like do to make it happen, and you all always do it so beautifully. So thank you. Yeah, definitely. Plus about the coffee, I was going to make tea within like that 30 minutes when we joined before we started, but because my computer was just not working with me, I was unable to. So we'll see how I fare. All right, we are going to get started. Again, please, if you haven't already, introduce yourself in the chat. But I wanted to first start us off by sharing this resource with y'all. So this is the SOI 2023 resource folder. So this will be your resource for everything that you're actually going to see today. It has the agenda for the training, our legislative agenda, all of the presentations that we're giving, just like some helpful tools for lobbying and things like that. I think it has like some one-pagers for a particular issue that we'll be talking about today. So please use that as a guide for you during the training. As things pop up, we may add things to the resource folder, just based off like any questions that come up, or if I straight up forgot to add something. So please let me know if there's like a particular resource that's missing or that you would like to see, and we'll see about like getting that on there. So yeah, we will go ahead and get started. Sorry, I'm like referring to my agenda here. All right, we'll go ahead and get started with community agreements. Well, actually, let's get started with like an overview of the agenda. So if you look in the resource folder, there is like an agenda document there. But I can start with just sharing what we have on the agenda today here. So after our welcome, I'll do like a quick Spark 101, just so y'all are familiar with this organization that's putting on this fantastic training. We'll go over our legislative agenda for the year. We'll do a lobbying and advocacy 101. Then we'll take a short break, 30-minute break for lunch, brunch, what have you. We'll continue with that lobbying conversation, and then we'll do an RJ organizing 101. So when you may remember when you registered for this training, there was a question around like along the lines of like, what else would you want to see like in this training? We got a lot of people just like wanting to learn about organizing, which awesome. So we're going to be providing that for y'all. And then at the end, we'll just leave any space for just any lingering questions and to close out. I do invite folks as we go through the training. You can put questions in the chat and things like that, but anything we don't get to, please re-uplift them at the end and we'll try to answer them then. All right, I wanted to start us off with some community agreements. These are just like some guidelines for how we're going to be with each other in this space. It really helps to create not a safe space, but a brave space for everyone to participate fully. And I'll also invite folks, if there's any like community agreement that you know of that's left off of this list, please let me know and we can add that in. So here are our community agreements. Start off with, do not assume identities or experiences. I know we're all coming from different spaces, different identities, different backgrounds, and it's always better just to like not assume where someone is coming from. We don't know how someone is entering the space or like what their experiences are. In a similar vein, respect people's pronouns and identities. I do ask that folks to please add pronouns to your display name if comfortable. To do that, you can kind of just like hover over your like picture. There should, or you can like right click it or something like that. And it should give you the option to like rename yourself and you can just add on your pronouns there. Please do so if you are comfortable. Take space, make space. So of course we want to hear from everyone. Like I said, you're all coming from different experiences and different just like expertise and brilliance. So definitely want y'all to take space and express that because we want to hear from you. We want to know like what you care about. But in the same vein, also make space. If you notice that you've said a lot or taken up a lot of space, just be mindful of that and be willing to move back a bit and let others to share as well. Assume positive intent, but honor impact. So I'm just going to assume that we're all joining this training with the best of intentions. We're here to learn. We're coming in with curious vibes, positive vibes, just ready to get activated. And we're not here to commit any harm. So we can assume that, but if harm occurs, we can honor that impact. We can note that that harm happened, and we can work through some processes to acknowledge that harm and make sure that the person who was harmed is taken care of. And then in similar vein, we have oops, ouch. So when harm does occur, or if you've noticed that you've said something that like maybe it just didn't like come out right or anything like that, or maybe you like misgender someone, something like that, you can just be like, oops, my bad. You know, we know you probably didn't mean to do that. Just acknowledge that that harm occurred. And if someone is harmed and it's not acknowledged, we definitely encourage folks to be like, ouch, actually, I didn't like how you said that, or I didn't like what you said there. You know, it was offensive, it was harmful, anything like that. We want to make sure that y'all feel okay to voice if a harm occurs. What's said here stays here, and what's learned here leaves here. So that's also known as the Vegas rule. Typically in trainings like this, people want to like share their experiences, especially when it has to do with like RJ. People may talk about like their abortions or their issues with getting healthcare and things like that. That's not stuff you have to like spread out to anyone. Those are the kind of conversations we want to leave here in this space. But of course, any learnings that we have, like you learn how to organize or you learn how to lobby today, definitely take that out and share that with your family, friends, community, things like that. And then finally, take care of yourself. And that can range from, please, like bio breaks, just take them. Or if for whatever reason, you're just like, actually, this training isn't my cup of tea, you will not hurt my feelings if you just like click that leave meeting button. Just do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, nourish yourself, all those fun things. Any questions about these community agreements or any additions to these community agreements? Awesome, awesome. And if any comes to mind, just like during the training, definitely invite folks to put that in the chat as well. All right, we are going to move into Spark 101. So I did want to take some time to just like introduce Spark, who we are, what we're about, where we came from. Just like, yeah, take a little bit of time to do that. So a very, very brief history of Spark. So Spark actually celebrated our 15-year anniversary last year. But I guess before Spark was founded, we were founded from Georgians for Choice, which was formed in 1986, to bring together a number of women's organizations in an effort to greater impact the protection and expansion of women's reproductive freedom in Georgia. Spark's co-founders, Paris Hatcher and Mia Mingus, who are still very much just like in the work on the ground doing this fantastic RJ, transformative justice, disability justice work, they joined Georgians for Choice. And I want to emphasize that back then, you know, these were like young folks. I think they were like in their early 20s when they joined. They joined on in 2004, and that's where they sort of incubated and conceptualized a radical queer analysis of the RJ movement. So this was out of a recognition that Georgians for Choice at the time was not really living within the tenets of reproductive justice, was not really focusing on issues that impacted queer folks or trans folks or gender expansive folks. So Paris and Mia made the conscious decision to create Spark from that collective. So a new organization was founded by these two young queer women of color in 2007, and it was called Spark Reproductive Justice Now. Spark was created for the purpose of building and strengthening the power of our communities and generating a reproductive justice movement that centers Black women and queer and trans people of color in Georgia and the South. Paris and Mia, they became co-directors, both under the age of 25, both young, queer, and women of color. And that sort of reverberates like to today and what our base looks like. Our base, we're folks of color, we're Black, we're queer, trans, young. That's something we definitely highlight as well, that young folks can do this work. They can create spaces where we organize, we lobby, we do those advocacy work, we create community. Just a brief moment about our mission. So we serve as an entry point and leadership pipeline for new social justice leaders and a political home for Black women and young people, centering Black queer women, trans folks, and folks living outside the gender binary. We utilize arts, culture, and media to build resources for and shift narratives about our communities. Spark engages in power building through grassroots organizing, advocacy, knowledge building, and political development of our base and members in Georgia and across the US South. So back in, I wanna say 2021, we went through a strategic planning process where we kind of reworked our mission, vision, and value statement. And this is what was born from that, like the folks on this, the staff members on this call right now created this mission statement just based off who our folks are, who we work with in community, the kind of work we do. And yeah, just like this beautiful, beautiful mission statement, and kind of gives you a glimpse of like what Spark is here to do. Our vision: we envision a world free from economic, social, political, cultural, and sexual oppression, especially anti-Black oppression, where Black queer women and young people, including trans folks and folks living outside the gender binary, have access to rest and thrive. We seek to bring about a world wherein communities center and hold each other's humanity with love, grace, joy, healing, and accountability. And we imagine a future where marginalized people have the autonomy to make decisions about their lives, bodies, sexuality, and reproduction free from fear, stigma, and shame. We envision a world where our people get to be there and their ancestors' wildest dreams. Always love this statement. Back when I first joined Spark, and a practice we still kind of do is just asking community members what liberation looks like to them. I believe with this vision statement, this was sort of like what we were, the energy we were kind of like bringing to the statement. What does liberation look like? What is our vision for liberation? Oh, and I'll also say you can find these statements also on our website, sparkrj.org, if you ever want a refresher. And then finally, our values. Spark's work and culture is rooted in principles of love, joy, and connection. We value radical rest and wellness as practices of liberation. Always highlight that radical rest and wellness piece because that is something that we are very, very transparent and like just serious about, that we do take that space for rest and to focus on our wellness. You'll see like in our base member meeting spaces, if you haven't been there, that each meeting we want to have some kind of self-care practice, if not Skillshare practice in there. And Spark also takes like a yearly like radical rest week, something that's actually been copied in other RJ organizations. Like Radical Rest Week has become a thing, and Spark sort of started that. We honor fluidity, adaptability, I always mess up the word, adaptability and growth as practices that allow us all to stand in our authenticity, intentionality, and truth. We strive to center folks who exist further in the margins and prioritize their needs and ideas. We engage in principled struggle as a means to build deeper relationships and communities and to lean into trust, honesty, grace, and accountability. Ooh, love that part. And we value freedom, equity, and accessible autonomy that is complete and unobstructed in all facets. Yes, all of that. Okay, yeah. We had to get all the things in there. All right, before we move on to that, any questions, comments around our mission, vision, values, or Spark's history? How are we doing on time? Oh, I'm actually doing relatively well on time. Awesome.
Hey, I had a question. I wanted to know, have you changed your mission and values in the last few years, post like the awakening after George Floyd's and Breonna Taylor's murder?
Yeah, so these mission, vision, and values were born out of our strategic planning process that we engaged in. And please, Spark staff, if I'm wrong, correct me, in 2021, like the top of 2021. And this was like a weekend long process where we just thought about like what was going on in our communities, what issues, yes, April 20th, thank you, KR. What issues we cared about deeply, even internally, how we worked together and what we valued and how we worked together. And born out of that were these beautiful mission, vision, and values statements. And yeah, I think before then, I don't know if like, I can't remember when I first joined Spark in 2017, if we like came up with a new mission, vision, values. But yeah, before that, our mission, vision, value statement looked somewhat different. It was still sort of like in a similar like vein, but I feel like these new statements kind of adapted to Spark's like changing staff, our changing like values, and like the folks that we work with and want to work with. I hope I answered your question. Awesome, awesome, awesome. That was a great question. Thank you. We're actually going to move into an overview of our legislative agenda. Y'all are putting these reactions on comments. I have not figured out how to do that. If someone wants to like tell me or show me how to do that, I welcome that, because that's like my favorite way of communicating is with a thumbs up or a heart, and I can't. Let me see if I can get this up. Before we move into our legislative agenda, I did want to share in the chat here a jam board, because we want to hear from y'all. So I don't know if like folks are familiar with Jamboard. Let me actually stop sharing so I can share the Jamboard real quick.
But also Agro, really, I don't know how to do the reaction either. So I'm like, I think when I updated Zoom, I don't know, I see it sometimes where it's like if you hover over someone's message, you can react to it, but I don't see it today, so I don't know.
It's just, I guess it's not for us.
Not today.
I'll just do it like the little like thingy, and I'll tell the person who I'm doing that for. So if you want to join us on this jam board, I said I would share my screen to show it. So I don't know if folks have used this tool before. It's really useful. It's free. That's why I love it. But we really want to hear from y'all about the issues you care about, like what issues are impacting your communities, your families, your lives, that you want to uplift. So how you can do that, if you go over here, I hope you can see my cursor, and click sticky note, it will open up a sticky note, and you can just like type in any issue that you care about. You don't have to put your name or anything like that. If you want to, you can. But yeah, I want to invite y'all to highlight that in the Jam board because we want to hear from y'all. Elias will emphasize this, but the legislative agenda is a living document, and that's a lot to do with y'all and like how your feedback and like what you want to see us highlight in our agenda. So yeah, want to give y'all space to do that. And then Elias is going to move us into our legislative agenda for 2023. Just give me 1 second, Elias, and I'll share my screen. And again, these slideshows are in the resource folder as well. Thanks for bearing with me. All right, take it away, Elias, if you're ready.
Yeah, hi. So we're super excited to launch Spark's 2023 legislative agenda. And today I'll just be walking us through the legislative agenda and discussing some of the different issue areas that Spark is working in and supporting the work of through other organizations. If you have any questions about the legislative agenda as I'm talking, feel free to either pop them in the chat, come off mute, or you can save them until the end for a discussion. Also, if you see me looking off my screen, it's because I have my script over here. So just so you know. You'll also notice that the words in our legislative agenda, throughout our legislative agenda, the words we use, like pregnant people and other gender neutral terms to discuss topics of pregnancy and abortion in our bodies. We do this very intentionally because Spark works hard to create discussions and spaces and actions that are mindful and respectful of trans and gender expansive people. This is about acknowledging that trans and gender expansive folks are often the most vulnerable among us, particularly Black, Indigenous, and other transgender expansive people of color. So the least we can do to support our candidates to make sure that we are advocating for and uplifting the needs of those people in these groups. You can go to the next slide. So here's just a brief look at our agenda topics. Our legislative agenda currently covers 11 different issue areas, all of which are rooted in our core guiding framework of reproductive justice. But I do also want to, oh, you go to the next slide, sorry. I do also want to raise that this agenda is a living document. The agenda will continue to be updated as the legislative agenda progresses and RJ issues continue to develop. If we missed an important RJ topic, let us know. We want the agenda to be collaborative and based on the needs of our community. Next slide. So our first issue area is queer and trans liberation, abolishing anti-Blackness, and uplifting anti-racism. So Spark is a reproductive justice organization. And reproductive justice, the abolishment of anti-Blackness, and queer and trans liberation are all movements that center those not reached by mainstream equality movements. Thus, we feel it is necessary to incorporate the issues of queer and trans liberation, abolishing anti-Blackness, and uplifting anti-racism as frameworks into our reproductive justice work. As we incorporate these issues into our work, we will see these topics throughout our legislative agenda. Specifically on this issue, Spark is making it clear that we oppose House Bill 1084, which Governor Brian Kemp signed into law last legislative session in 2022. For those who are unfamiliar, this law bans educators from teaching divisive concepts of systemic and interpersonal racism in Georgia classrooms. Although the law does not overtly prevent educators from accurately teaching about historic and modern events, it does make it much more difficult for educators to navigate teaching students about topics surrounding Black and Indigenous history and discussing the continued impact of enslavement of Black people and the attempted genocide of Indigenous peoples throughout the United States for fear of breaking the law. So Spark strongly opposes this law as it attempts to whitewash this country's history, and we support efforts by other organizations and coalitions that attempt to reform or repeal this legislation. The impacts of racism and anti-Blackness have very real consequences that we cannot ignore, and young people in Georgia deserve the opportunity to learn how we can work toward collective liberation. In a similar vein, I'm sure everyone here has heard of the Don't Say Gay bills that come out of states such as Florida. In 2022, Georgians blocked the Republican-introduced Common Humanity in Private Education Act, which would have banned classroom discussions of sexual orientation or gender identity and curricula and programs based in critical theory in private school primary grade classrooms. As we know, the phrase critical theory is often used as a euphemism in this type of legislation for any and all discussions surrounding racism and anti-Blackness. Although the ban did not pass in 2022, thanks to the efforts of Georgians, we must prepare in the event that similar bills are introduced during the 2023 legislative session. It cannot be ignored that bills seeking to ban discussions and teachings of gender identity and sexual orientation often mirror or even include bills that target discussions and teachings about systemic racism and the histories of Black and Indigenous people in the United States. In the interest of abolishing anti-Blackness and uplifting queer and trans liberation, we must recognize that the fight against transphobia and homophobia is intricately linked with and cannot be separated from the anti-racist fights against white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and settler colonialism. Spark advocates against any and all bills that attempt to censor and whitewash discussions of history, race, racism, gender identity, and sexual orientation within our state's classrooms. Next slide. So our second issue area is protecting trans young people. The next slide. So this is an extremely important issue area as we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of legislative and social attacks on trans people, particularly trans young people across the country. Trans and gender expansive youth deserve all of the same opportunities to thrive as their cisgender peers. Spark advocates for the health and safety of trans youth across Georgia and opposes all legislation introduced this session that is designed to harm trans youth. So along with the banning of teaching divisive concepts, HB 1084 passed last year also created an athletic executive oversight committee in Georgia that was granted the specific authority to ban trans girls and trans feminine students from participating in girls sports teams. Bans like this single out and ostracize trans and gender expansive student athletes, but not only denying them the right to play on a sports team that aligns with their gender identity, but subjects already vulnerable youth to heightened levels of surveillance and scrutiny by their schools, peers, and the parents of their peers. Spark advocates for the abolishment of all bans that deny trans students the right to play on the sports team of their choice. Spark is also committed to protecting trans youth access to gender-affirming care. Across the country just this year, we've seen bills introduced and passed that limit access to gender-affirming care for trans young people. Utah just passed a ban on gender-affirming care for trans people under the age of 18, and 18 other states are currently considering similar legislation. Oklahoma has also banned gender-affirming healthcare for any trans people under the age of 26. For people who need it, gender-affirming medical care is critical and often life-saving. This includes access to puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and gender-affirming surgeries and non-surgical procedures. Medical professionals who provide this care to trans and gender-expansive youth should not have to choose between providing substandard care to their patients or committing a felony. Although, thankfully, we have not yet seen any bills like this introduced in Georgia, we do strongly oppose any legislation criminalizing gender-affirming care providers or the parents of trans and gender-expansive youth undergoing gender-affirming care in our state. Next slide. So our third issue area on our legislative agenda is decreasing the prevalence, power, and funding of crisis pregnancy centers. So this is an issue area that Spark is very proactive in this legislative session. For those unaware, crisis pregnancy centers, or CPCs, are clinic-type organizations that exist for the sole purpose of deterring people from having abortions. They're unregulated, unlicensed, and provide limited medical services. They have no limited medical providers on staff usually, and often deceive and misinform people seeking care. They attempt to scare pregnant people out of seeking abortions by providing explicitly religious counseling and hyperbolically misleading, if not outright false, information about the purported dangers of birth control and abortion care. In 2016, Georgia passed the Positive Alternatives for Pregnancy and Parenting Grant Program, which allocates around $2 million a year to crisis pregnancy centers. Since the inception of this program, our state has sunk more than $10.5 million into funding these sorts of organizations. Spark, along with our legislative partners, are currently working toward our ultimate goal of repealing this program and investing those funds in programs and services that our communities actually need. This legislative session, Spark and our coalition partners through Amplify Georgia are preparing to introduce 2 different bills that would limit the power CPCs have here in Georgia. The first bill is the Pregnancy Center Disclosure Act, which would require CPCs to disclose to clients that they are not licensed medical centers or do not have a licensed provider on staff. The second bill is the Crisis Pregnancy Center Fraud Prevention Act, which would target deceptive advertising practices of CPCs by prohibiting fraudulent and misleading advertising. So Spark supports the passage of these bills, as well as any legislation that limits the power that CPCs have in our state. Next slide. Our fourth issue area is protecting and increasing abortion access. So as I'm sure everyone here is aware, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, Georgia's 6-week abortion ban went into immediate effect. In November, in the case Sister Song versus Georgia, the abortion ban was ruled to be void as it was passed when abortion was constitutionally protected. The case was immediately appealed to by the state, and the appeals court paused the ruling until it made a decision on the case. This effectively reinstated the 6-week abortion ban in Georgia, at least temporarily. The case is set to be heard by the Georgia Supreme Court on March 28, 2023, and Spark and our partners at Amplify will be following the case. But regardless of the outcome of the case, it is necessary that we continue to fight for more abortion access in Georgia. Roe was the bottom line, and we are fighting for more. To expand abortion access in our state, Spark, through our community organizer, Asha, is chairing the Reproductive Freedom Act in collaboration with our coalition partners in Amplify Georgia. The Reproductive Freedom Act was introduced as HB 75 and SB 15 on January 24th, and would enshrine the right to abortion access in our state. If passed, the Reproductive Freedom Act would make safe and legal abortion care an option for more people. Next slide. 5 is improving the gender marker / name change process. So trans and gender expansive people should be able to easily change their legal name or gender marker on their government issued documents to reflect their gender accurately. Having documents that indicate sex assigned at birth rather than a gender marker that more accurately reflects one's lived experience, or having inconsistencies between different documents, can make it more difficult for trans and gender expansive people to move through society safely. The process to change your documents in Georgia is over-invasive, difficult to navigate, and expensive. Agencies in Georgia refuse to change the gender marker on a driver's license or birth certificate unless an applicant provides documentation that they have undergone gender-affirming surgery. Many trans people don't want surgery, can't get surgery for medical reasons, or can't access surgical care due to financial barriers. Even the ones that do are then required to provide documentation of private medical procedures to the state of Georgia. So Spark is a member of multiple efforts to combat these issues, including the Freedom to Drive Coalition, which is a diverse coalition representing immigrant communities, survivors of violence, trans people, people impacted by homelessness, and people who are formerly incarcerated. This legislative session, the coalition will be reintroducing the Freedom to Drive Act, which would allow all qualified state residents to apply for a new type of driver's card, driver's license called a driver's card. So this card would serve as a form of state ID, like a license, but the difference is it wouldn't be real ID compliant. Georgia residents would be able to apply for a driver's license with an expanded range of documents to verify identity, making a driver's card more accessible for a wide range of Georgians, including trans people. Spark additionally advocates for policy changes, such as supporting the removal of any surgical requirements for gender marker changes and adopting a self-attestation standard that allows trans people to check a box to identify their gender without any sort of doctor's or medical testimony. Trans people in Georgia should be able to get identification documents without medical gatekeeping in order to stay safe, access resources, and reduce the risk of discrimination and violence. Next slide. So our next issue area is the prison industrial complex abolition. So SPARC is an abolitionist organization and advocates for the abolition of the prison industrial complex and the creation of lasting and restorative alternatives to policing, the criminal legal system, and carceral punishment. These institutions came into being as a means to systemically enforce anti-Black racism, and true liberation cannot exist in a world where they continue to exist. While prisons do continue to exist, we advocate for all people who are incarcerated to be treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve. Although we are pleased that Georgia has passed anti-shackling legislation, we recognize that our state can do much more to address the wide range of problems created and perpetuated by the prison industrial complex. We support both reformist policies that make incremental improvements to conditions on the ground for people subject to the carceral state, as well as transformative changes with the goal of complete abolition. Next slide. SPARC is also supports HIV decriminalization. So SPARC has been working in and supporting HIV decriminalization for a while now. Although last year, the governor passed a law that made important and much needed amendments to the state's HIV criminal laws, people living with HIV are still subjected to uniquely negative treatment under the law here in Georgia. Next slide. Although the revised law means that people living with HIV will no longer face felony charges for simply not disclosing their status before having sex, the current law still does signal out people living with HIV. The law also does not foreclose the continued use of Georgia's general criminal laws against people living with HIV, such as aggravated assault laws, which have a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The law also only requires that prosecutions prove intent to transmit, not actual transmission of HIV. HIV criminal laws play on normative prejudice at the intersection of transphobia, homophobia, anti-Black racism, misogyny, and the stigmatization of sex work and drug use. They also disincentivize people from knowing their status by getting tested regularly. SPARC advocates for full HIV decriminalization within the state of Georgia and supports efforts to destigmatize HIV and AIDS. Next slide. SPARC also supports advocacy for comprehensive sexual education. Next slide. So under Georgia's current law, sex education instruction in Georgia schools must emphasize abstinence from sexual activities until marriage as an important personal goal and as an effective method of prevention of pregnancy, STIs, and AIDS. State law does not require sexual education curriculums to be comprehensive, nor is it required to even be medically accurate. The instruction is very rarely inclusive of students with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities, and these courses often center on white, cisgender, abled, heterosexual experiences that include fear-mongering and Christian moralism. This is a problem for the health and safety of many of Georgia students. Without comprehensive sex ed, queer, trans, gender expansive, and disabled people are unlikely to see their experiences and needs addressed in traditional education contexts. In some cases, disabled people reach adulthood without ever having received any sexual education at all. For queer, trans, and gender expansive Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, whose sexual health needs may be affected by socioeconomic, educational, health, and criminalization disparities, as well as historical trauma, the shortcomings of traditional sex ed are further exacerbated. Providing folks with the tools to make informed decisions around sexuality, pleasure, and reproduction is necessary in the expansive project of reproductive justice. Spark advocates for comprehensive, secular, trauma-informed, disability-inclusive, queer-inclusive, and trans-inclusive sex education. Queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other students of color in Georgia schools deserve a scientifically accurate curriculum that speaks to their experiences and needs. Next slide. Our next issue area is opposing Georgia's fetal personhood statute. So next slide. Georgia's current 6-week abortion ban not only bans abortions, but grants a fetus the legal status of personhood. This statute also explicitly grants fetuses new rights and right to equal protection under the state and federal constitutions. This designation is unprecedented. Georgia is the first state in the country to do this. And not only is this unprecedented, but until the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it was unconstitutional. So although what the fetal personhood statute means in practice is still unclear, it is certain that this has the potential to open pregnant people to a heightened risk, heightened surveillance and risk of criminalization, which we know would be heightened for Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and queer and trans people. Fetal personhood provisions may also create additional barriers to IVF, which will be discussed more in depth in later on in the agenda. Although these outcomes are only speculation at this point, it is clear that this fetal personhood statute is dangerous for people who are pregnant or can become pregnant. Pregnant people should not risk heightened criminalization simply because they are pregnant. Spark strongly opposes this fetal personhood provision of Georgia's 6-week abortion ban and demands that the provision be removed from Georgia law along with the rest of the abortion ban. Next slide. So our next issue area is increasing access to family planning, decriminalizing artificial insemination, and protecting in vitro fertilization, or IVF. Next slide. So the reproductive justice framework demands that every person has access to the services and circumstances they need to control their reproductive futures. This includes the ability to decide if, when, and how to have children. Ensuring that family planning services are affordable and accessible is necessary to meet this demand. So right now in Georgia, the only people who can legally perform artificial insemination are licensed physicians. This creates a significant financial and safety barrier on people seeking to become pregnant through artificial insemination. Requiring interactions with physicians at often significant financial and physiological costs will impacts queer, trans, and gender expansive individuals more than their cisgender heterosexual counterparts. It also means that midwives who wish to perform these services or individuals who want to manage their own AI expose themselves to criminal liability if they do so. And then additionally, because of the 6-week abortion ban's fetal personhood provision, it is possible that this provision could in the future be used to create additional barriers when accessing IVF. During the in vitro fertilization process, eggs are retrieved from a patient while they're still in the fallopian tube. The egg is then fertilized outside of the body with fresh or frozen sperm before being implanted into the uterus. When a person undergoes IVF, many eggs are fertilized at once, but only one or two are implanted. Leftover unused embryos are then frozen or discarded. The fetal personhood provision granting an embryo the same legal protection as a person could make it very difficult for people to receive this care or doctors to perform this care because you can't typically freeze or discard a person. Although IVF is still currently legal in Georgia, legal barriers may begin to arise in the future because of this provision. Spark opposes any future legislation that may limit the legal accessibility of AI and IVF and demands that all Georgians are able to access family planning services, AI, and IVF. Next slide. And our final issue area is Amplify Georgia's reproductive justice agenda. Next slide. So finally, Spark is an active member of the Amplify Georgia Coalition, which is a group of reproductive health, rights, and justice organizations based in Georgia. At the core of our work, this coalition has identified 4 main campaigns to form our reproductive justice agenda. So the first one is to uproot racism in reproductive health care. The second is to expand postpartum Medicaid to a full 12 months after a person gives birth. The third is to defund and incapacitate deceptive anti-abortion CPCs. And then the fourth is to ensure access to abortion care and birth control through the Reproductive Freedom Act. As I mentioned previously, Spark is leading Amplify's campaign addressing the prevalence, power, and funding of CPCs, as well as chairing the Reproductive Freedom Act campaign. We fully support the full range of Amplify's reproductive justice agenda and will continue to work with our coalition partners to advance all of their campaigns throughout the legislative session and beyond. Next slide. And that's our agenda. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let us know.
Thank you so much, Elias. That was amazing. I appreciate like you sharing all of that. I hope y'all like learned a lot. Definitely want to give space for questions because Elias is awesome. We have that space for questions. So any questions, please let us know. I'll leave some space for that.
Also, the presentation should be in the resource folder. So if anybody wants to go through it, look back again at more slides, you can totally do that. Oh, also the full agenda, or I think the full legislative agenda will be on the Spark website. Is that correct, Egbo? Yes, so if you want to read the full agenda with a little bit more in depth, it'll be on the website too.
It's also in the resource folder. Well, folks, sorry, saw that we have questions. So Elias, someone asked, or Erica asked, do you know what the heartbeat bill, how many votes did it take to pass? I heard it was by 1 vote.
Yeah, that's my knowledge too. It was the 6-week abortion ban and heartbeat bill were by 1 vote.
Yeah, that is correct. And that's really a testament to just like all the organizing that went around that bill. Spark staff will tell you 2019 with HB 481 was a lot. But also it just like involved a lot of just like community efforts and organizational efforts to prevent that bill from passing. And even though unfortunately it did end up passing, the fact that it passed by 1 vote really shows that a lot of work, Carter, a lot of work went into it with talking to legislators and getting them to see our point of view, getting them to abstain from voting if they really couldn't be about it. So yeah, really, really proud of that effort. Still understand that people are tired from that effort. Great question. Ellie asks, are there any priority areas that will be particularly urgent this legislative session? Elias, did you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So this legislative session, I think our priority areas that are particularly urgent are supporting the Reproductive Freedom Act, as well as working toward passing or introducing these bills relating to defunding and attacking the power of CPCs here in Georgia.
I'll also say we're fortunate, like tentatively like fortunate that like right now we really haven't seen, as far as like our issue areas, we really haven't seen any like harmful bills be introduced just yet. I'll talk a little bit about like the legislative process, but typically if a bill is introduced by like crossover day or the middle of session, then there's just going to be like no movement on that bill. So far we haven't seen anything. Crossover day is March 6th. Still holding out hope. Carolyn asks, and I hope I pronounced that right, Carolyn or Caroline, how are CPCs not illegal since the staff are not licensed professionals? How are they able to get a business license and building for the center? Elias, can I answer this one? So I chair the CPC campaign, so I love talking about CPCs. And that is a great question. And that's a question a lot of people ask, like, how are these centers allowed to exist? Short answer, or the answer I always want to say is like, I don't know, it's ridiculous. But I guess the long answer is that these centers are nonprofit organizations, like Spark's nonprofit organization. These centers are also 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So how they kind of protect themselves, they don't really classify themselves, I guess, in the legal sense as medical clinics, even though they may advertise themselves in various ways as like medical clinics or pregnancy resource clinics. They don't classify themselves as that. They claim not to have any medical professionals on staff, and with that, they can basically do what they want. Because they don't have any like medical professionals who are accountable to any kind of like licensing board, they can pretty much tell folks just, I guess, lies about their healthcare. And they use like freedom of speech to kind of like protect that right. We'll talk a little bit more about it, I believe, but with the efforts we're trying to do this year with introducing like just truth in advertising legislation to make it so that they can't lie to folks, we're hoping that this will sort of stop them from misleading folks who are just looking for services, from like telling folks that, oh yeah, you can like reverse an abortion, or yeah, you can reverse a medication abortion, or oh yeah, like come in, we'll give you an ultrasound, even though we're not licensed ultrasound techs. And apparently that's legal too. Like anybody can give someone an ultrasound. As long as you're not using it for diagnostic purposes, you can give someone an ultrasound. I think diagnostic purposes is a bit grainy, legally grainy to my sense, because they will straight up tell people how far along they are, and that will be a lie. They don't know how far, they like can't really accurately describe how far along they are. Or they'll tell people straight up that there is a complication, which results in them like not being able to have an abortion, or yeah, or they'll we've heard like stories of them playing like random recordings and being like, yeah, that's your baby's heartbeat right there. So just straight up lies, deceit, trickery, all of these other things. Thank you for asking that question, because again, I can go on for hours. And yeah, it's so wrong. It's terrible. And that's why it's outrageous that Georgia funds them to the tune of $2 million a year. And ultimately, in the long term, we hope to rescind that funding and reallocate it to actual helpful, truthful, honest organizations that can actually help pregnant folks. Any other questions? Yep, agreed. I will say that in the campaign, our Fake Clinic Suck campaign, yes, a part of it is like just defunding CPCs, but like I said, a big part of it is reallocating those funds to helpful services, whether it's to I don't know, like an abortion fund, which state of Georgia, that we don't know if that will ever happen, at least not within the next few years, or to like Medicaid expansion or to straight up giving it to pregnant people who need support, right? That's like actually the dream, right? To be able to give pregnant people money because they know exactly what they need to spend the money on for their own health. So yeah, that's a big, big part of the campaign is reallocating that funding. We could easily be like, yeah, just take that funding away, but we really want to see it be put to good use. Any other questions? In the meantime, I can highlight some of the things that were put on the jam board. Folks uplifted abortion and abortion stigma, absolutely. Anti-Blackness and critical race theory, absolutely. Elias did a great job just explaining just the attacks on accurate education in Georgia. Luckily, we haven't seen it go as far as Texas and Florida. But again, testament to like the organizing that that's been happening in this state as well. Someone put a few Black women on Twitter were talking last week. Yes, yes, I think I saw that as well. I also read an article earlier this week, and I'll like provide just like a light trigger warning because about sexual assault. But it was a legal argument for these transvaginal ultrasounds being conducted by CPCs, unlicensed ultrasound technicians. It was a legal argument to classify that as assault. And I don't know if that's like been a thing in other states or anything like that. But it really just goes to show just like how harmful these centers are. They actually do inflict physical harm. Highlighting other things in the Jamboard: Black, queer, trans liberation, absolutely. Environmental justice, period poverty, police arresting humans trying to access abortions and support abortions, yes. Economic justice, body liberation, immigrant rights, censorship / public education, trans and LBG plus protections, affordable housing, abolition. Glad someone highlighted that. Burnout and hostility in social good workspaces. Ooh, say that. I think, and even just like along with Spark's like radical rest practice, it's also this acknowledgement that we are navigating the nonprofit industrial complex, and that comes with navigating the harms of just capitalism, right, and white supremacy, and that leads to burnout. After HB 41 in 2019, a lot of repro folks were burnt out. Like people are still recovering from that because it was a lot of work, a lot of effort. And also just holding like, you know, whether it's like those larger, more funded organizations accountable, and getting funders to also support smaller organizations who are doing more of this on the ground work. Medicaid expansion, protection of trans rights in Georgia, childcare, women's rights, housing, earth care, land back, agriculture. I think I highlighted all of them. Oh, and someone put Abortion Every Day by Jessica Valenti blog on Substack. Awesome. Oh, someone asked, who is selling the ultrasound equipment to these CPCs? You can, I think, I feel like a while back I Googled it, and I think you can straight up get an ultrasound machine on Amazon. Oh yeah, so you can like, yeah, you can buy an ultrasound machine on Amazon. We have someone who's part of the campaign who works in an abortion clinic. I think she works sort of like at the front desk. And she hears stories from people who are trying to get healthcare, who encounter a CPC, and just like all of like the terribleness that goes with that. And she's really like gung-ho about like repro organizations just like buying an ultrasound machine, getting like an actual ultrasound tech, getting a van, and like actually like providing that resource to folks from like a licensed professional. Would love to see that happen. CPCs operate in the same, in like similar way, in that they'll straight up get a van, park it in front of an abortion clinic, and be like, don't go over here, come over here. We have an ultrasound machine. We're just going to do everything that you're just going to like get happen in there. But also we will shame you into not getting an abortion. Amazon truly needs to be stopped. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we're coming up on time, but I'll also say, just like in like the spirit of holding some of like these big tech companies accountable when it comes to these kinds of issues, there has been a big push with Google and Yelp to make it more clear when a particular organization, or I guess clinic, is a crisis pregnancy center and not an abortion clinic. A lot of the time, people who are just like trying to get care may like Google abortion clinic, and a crisis pregnancy center will come up, and that's just not okay. So Google has begun a push to make it more clear whether an organization is a crisis pregnancy center, Yelp as well. So yeah, there are some efforts there to hold some of like these big tech companies accountable. I don't know how Amazon can straight up just sell an ultrasound machine. But I think it really just goes along with the fact that you don't necessarily have to be licensed to give an ultrasound. All righty, well, we are at time for this section. Please, if any other questions come up, I encourage folks to put them in the chat. Where is my agenda? There we go. Now we're going to move into a conversation on lobbying and advocacy. So this is going to be a pretty important part of the training, because a big part of legislative session is doing that lobbying and advocacy work so that legislators are accountable to their constituents. So give me one sec and I'll share my screen. I'll also say that after our lobbying and advocacy 101, we'll go into our lunch break. And then once we reconvene, we'll continue that conversation and do some breakouts. So give me one sec and I'll share my screen. All righty, you should be able to see a slideshow with Georgia State Legislative Advocacy 101. So with this section, I'm just gonna explain just how I guess a bill becomes a law in Georgia, where lobbying and advocacy fits into that, and how you can actually do that work. Oh, and I also saw in the chat, just wanted to make sure I uploaded that. Nicole says, in my work in organizing against CPCs, we discover the three things that make them, quote, seductive are their promotions for free ultrasounds, free diapers, and general friendliness. We have to make ultrasounds free nationwide, like New York State has made mammograms free to those who need one. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. This will be the last thing I say about CPCs, I promise. But yeah, I agree that CPCs, to a certain extent, they provide a resource for folks when it comes to like free pregnancy tests, free ultrasounds, free diapers. That's why we need to reallocate those funds to actual evidence-based services, because people shouldn't have to experience harm when they're getting these services, and they should be free. All right. So just a brief overview of what I'm going to go over. So I'll talk about the Georgia legislature, what that look like, what it looks like, what it's comprised of. I'll talk about legislative session, introducing a bill, how a bill becomes a law, crossover day and sine die. I mentioned crossover day earlier, so I'll talk a bit more about that. Giving testimony, lobbying on the ropes, and then additional forms of advocacy. I made some like changes to these slides, so like this agenda may not be in the correct order, so bear with me. Make sure I'm okay. 45 minutes for this. Cool. So Georgia's legislature, so similar to Congress, Georgia has two chambers made up of 236 voting members. So the chambers are the House of Representatives and the Senate. They each serve 2-year terms. So every 2 years is it's election season, where I believe half of the legislatures in the Georgia General Assembly are up for election, re-election, what have you. And you can see here that I wanted to also like highlight that they don't get paid a lot to do this work, which is really kind of a barrier for community members who may want to run for office and do this work, but they can't afford to take the first quarter of the year off to be in the legislature because they can't survive off of this salary alone. So that's kind of a barrier. We do have like a lot of members who also have full-time jobs outside of the legislature. So I wanted to highlight that as well. So this actually may be a bit old, but in 2020, when this was created, we had 76 Democrats in the House and 103 Republicans. I will say that in Georgia, typically that's what we see, that Republicans do have a majority. But that majority has kind of like narrowed over the years. I will say like in 2022, that majority narrowed a little bit in the House of Representatives. So, I mean, we always hear like, yeah, Georgia's a purple state, maybe federally, but within the state, it's still very much like a Republican stronghold. So this is what legislative session looks like. Session typically begins on the second Monday in January. Not typically, it always begins on the second Monday in January. And it lasts 40 non-consecutive legislative days. So what I mean by that, when we enter legislative session for a new year, typically we don't know when it's going to end, because even though we know that it does last 40 legislative days, those aren't consecutive. Amongst those days are also like committee days that don't count as legislative days, like office days, holidays, oh, we just don't want to meet today days, like things like that. So the 40 days aren't necessarily like consecutive. So we can't really at the beginning of the year just count off like Monday through Friday until we know when the last day of session is. We were actually fortunate this year in that they released the General Assembly schedule earlier than usual. I feel like typically we don't know like what they got going on until maybe right before crossover day. So we were very fortunate that they actually made that clear earlier this year, and session ends March 29th this year, I believe. And I think that's probably the next slide. So that's why here we have that it ends typically late March, early April, just depending on like what's going on. I think in previous years, they've wanted to like wrap up session earlier for like elections, I can't remember. Oh yeah, the Masters like golf tournament. They wanted to like wrap up session earlier. They adjusted session days, I think, earlier this year because UGA went to the football sports playoffs things. So yeah, it really just depends on like what the state of Georgia has going on. Yeah, UGA football. Thank you, Erica. Sorry, let me go back. And I mentioned crossover day before, maybe I'll mention it a bit more later, but crossover day is the middle of session. It's like the halfway mark for session. With crossover day, that's typically like the last day a bill can be introduced and go through the whole like bill process within that legislative year. After crossover day, a bill can still be introduced, but we won't see it won't like move until maybe the next legislative year if we're like in the first year of a 2-year session, or like you just can't, it just doesn't make sense to introduce a bill after crossover day because it would just be like dead. So yeah, that's crossover day. And then sine die is just the last day of session, and that's typically like goes on into the wee hours of the morning, and we're just really just scrambling to pass different legislations and things like that. So the process of introducing a bill, I will say that's pretty similar to what we see in Congress. So introducing a bill, we either like pre-file it. So pre-filing starts, I believe, in October of the previous year. Folks can start just like pre-filing bills. Or during session, of course, folks can just like introduce bills when they want. Before you file these bills, if you're like an organization like Spark, or if you're just like a citizen who wants to introduce some kind of like legislation, or you have an issue you want to be addressed, you may want to build a relationship with a legislator, tell them about the issue, tell them what you want to have done about it, give them the research, all of like the tools they need to champion the bill for you, because ultimately they're the only ones who can introduce a bill and put it in like the hopper. So here is just like an overview of how a bill becomes a law. So once it's introduced, it's assigned to a committee. I'll say that first it's assigned to the Rules Committee. So a bill is introduced by putting it in the hopper in the chamber it's going to be introduced in, whether that's like the House or the Senate. The bill is read into the chamber that it's in, and then sent to the Rules Committee, which then assigns it to its corresponding committee. So if it's a bill that has to do with like healthcare, it'll be assigned to Health and Human Services if it's on the Senate side. If it's a bill that has to do with like, I don't know, like agriculture, it will be assigned to like the Agriculture Committee and things like that. Sometimes we don't know what committee a bill is going to be assigned to, and sometimes that's part of the lobbying process, is getting in contact with the Rules Committee and being like, hey, like, can you assign it to this committee because we have a champion on that committee and they're going to make sure that it's heard, and all of these other things. Once it's assigned to a committee, it's really up to the committee chair whether they're going to hold a hearing and a vote for that bill. Again, that's another instance where there's like lobbying and advocacy that goes on, where we're trying to convince maybe a committee chair to hold a hearing for a particular bill, or to not hold a hearing for a particular bill. Like with 481, every step of this process, every step of this process, there was someone lobbying to stop the bill some way. So it gets assigned to a committee. They do decide to hold a hearing for it. So the hearing is open to the public, typically. Depending on the issue, there may be some like shady things that go on to keep the public, I guess, a bit isolated from the issue or keep the public away from the issue. But as constituents, it is your right to go and speak about the issue if you care about it. So these should be open to the public, but some of the things they do is just like limit the time that you get to speak. If they say the meeting's over, and whoever didn't get to speak just didn't get to speak, things like that. And once the public speaks, maybe like the legislator who's championed the bill speaks, different experts come in and speak, then it's time for a vote. Based off like all the things they heard, the committee members vote on whether they want the bill to pass or not and move forward. Yeah. So yeah, once it comes up to a vote and they vote to move it move it along, put it on the rules calendar again to be set to be heard in the chamber, like the House. So let's say that a bill was introduced in the House, it went to a House committee, then it's put on like the calendar to be heard and put up to a floor debate amongst the legislators in the House. So depending on how controversial the bill is, there could be like a lot of just like debate, a lot of media attention, a lot of heightened security. Again, I refer to 481 where cops were deep that day when any day that it came up to a floor debate and vote. And it really was just folks, the public, which is our right, going in there to see this happen and voice displeasure and things like that. So after floor debate comes up to a vote, they may vote to pass it, or they may vote to not pass it, or they may vote to like pass it with like some amendments or something like that. It's then sent over to the other side. So if it started in the House, it's sent to the Senate, and they repeat that process again. Maybe they'll have amendments, reconsiderations, things like that. If they do have amendments, it's then sent back to the House for them to like agree on those amendments and all those other things. And maybe they'll have more amendments, and it's back and forth until both chambers can agree on one bill. So the final chamber votes on the final decision. If they do vote to pass it, it is then sent to the governor. The governor can do one of three things. The governor can sign it into law, then it goes into effect. The governor can veto it, in which case it can go back to the legislature, and I think it needs like a supermajority to actually pass. They can like go around the governor and pass it that way, or the governor can do nothing and it passes that way. And that's how a bill becomes a law. So yeah, just reiterating what happens when it like goes to a committee. So it's assigned to a committee by the Speaker of the House or Lieutenant Governor. I think I misspoke earlier. Rules happens after it's gone to a committee. The Speaker or the Lieutenant Governor, depending on what chamber you're in, they actually assign it to the committee, not the Rules Committee. So sorry about that. So the chair of the committee schedules the hearing for the bill. Have the hearing, then they vote and report like whatever findings or whatever amendments they wanted to make. Added to the House or Senate floor vote. The sponsor typically presents it. They give their reasoning as to like why it needs to pass, like why they're introducing it. This is an opportunity for legislators to ask questions, add amendments, and then finally vote on whether they want to pass the bill or not pass the bill. And their votes are public. That's definitely a good organizing tool for organizations who actually can do more lobbying than 501c3 organizations, which Spark is. It's a good tool to kind of show how legislators voted on specific issues. Actually, even 501c3s can show how legislators voted. We can't really say, oh, they voted for the 6-week abortion ban, so don't vote for them. We really can just educate people on how legislators voted. And we just do that equally with everyone. It's up to the public to make an educated guess, you know, or an educated decision rather. Like I said, pass the second chamber and reconsideration. We repeat that process. It seems kind of tedious, but like, I think once it gets to the swing of things, just like depending on the bill, it can go really, really quickly or really, really slowly. Both chambers must pass the exact same version of a bill. Sometimes they'll convene a conference committee made up of like both, made up of representatives from the committees from both houses or from both chambers to come together and like hash it out. So they'll decide like when to take something out or like what compromises they're willing to make, things like that, just to basically get to this exact same version of a bill that both chambers can pass. Yes, Carter actually just put the Uber Eats voucher in the chat. Spark is covering Uber Eats for everyone joining us on this call. So please take some time to order lunch. And I will say, what time is it? Oh, I am doing great on time. Yeah, we break for lunch at 12 o'clock. So thanks, Carter, for dropping that in the chat. So yeah, I explained a bit about crossover day and sine die. So with crossover day, like I said, the deadline for a bill to pass out of the chamber it originated in to be considered by the other chamber this legislative session. So we call it crossover day because that's the deadline for it to cross over into the next chamber. I have seen when like, you know, legislators like really just hurrying to get a bill from the House to the Senate during like the day of crossover day. That's also another day that typically like goes on into like the wee hours because legislators are really like advocating for particular bills, or there's just like other things going on in the background and workings to make some things pass, add amendments to particular bills, things like that. And then sine die again is the final day of the legislative session. I don't think I highlighted before, but Georgia has a 2-year legislative session. So yes, each year, the first quarter of the year, typically like, you know, we have that legislative session, but we have a 2-year session, which means bills have basically 2 years to get passed if introduced within that first year. So even if a bill doesn't make it past crossover day for this year, we're on the first year actually of a 2-year session right now. If a bill doesn't pass or cross over, it's still alive for next year. We can still do like the same advocacy. If we are able to introduce a bill, we don't have to reintroduce it. It's really just in the same place that it was before that year's session ended. But if we're at the second year of this 2-year session and a bill just does not like move before crossover day, or just like doesn't like move after crossover day, or it's not passed or anything like that, it's dead. It's dead. So the next year, if you do want that issue to come up again, you'll have to reintroduce that bill. So I wanted to highlight like just what goes on sort of in a committee hearing. I talked a bit about it. The members of the committee have to basically be in attendance, well, not be in attendance, but they have to listen to the public if they are impacted by the bill. So it's typically in person or at the Capitol. we noted that during COVID, when everything was kind of shut down and remote, it was a bit harder to get folks to be able to testify at a committee hearing. Like they really were making it hard for folks to testify virtually, which ridiculous. They were kind of adamant about folks joining in person to testify, and depending on the bill, that could be really strategic, right? If it's really controversial, you don't want a bunch of members of the public who are angry about it in the committee room. The people are invited to make a 2-minute statement talking about the bill, how it impacts their communities. Sometimes we'll bring in like experts to testify. So as it pertains to abortion, we'll bring in like doctors, MDs, doctors of public health, experts who can speak to that particular issue. Whether the committee takes those experts into consideration really just depends on like their own agendas, right? You make your position on the bill clear and you make your argument concise, because again, you have that 2 minutes. They're pretty like non-lenient about that, especially for more like controversial bills. They will like gavel, gavel, like stop talking, cut your mic, all these other things, or to like the worst extent, they may have security come and escort you out. We encourage folks to bring in their personal narratives. Storytelling is a huge just organizing skill that folks should have. How do you tell your story? Whether it's about how it's impacting your community or you personally, like why do you care so much that you came all the way down here to talk about this bill? And which is particularly resonant for folks who live in like rural Georgia. Like Atlanta is not like accessible, honestly, to everyone. So for folks to be able to come over from like what, Macon, Savannah, Albany, it shows that they really, really care about the issue. Our testimony is typically 2 minutes, or do the committees change the rules? Yeah, I mean, typically 2 minutes, and like they can change the rules again based on like how controversial the issue is or how many people they may have like signed up to speak. I forgot to mention that you have to sign up to speak. You can't just like show up to the podium and just start saying things. You have to sign up. Wanted to note that because they also are a stickler about that they will not acknowledge you if you didn't sign up. Some other ways to engage, because we recognize that the Georgia State Capitol isn't always a safe, well, isn't a safe space for our community members. A lot of like just police presence. The ID requirements to get into the Capitol may not be accessible to everyone who may be undocumented, or trans folks who just do not have like their accurate gender marker on their ID. So it's not necessarily like, it's not an accessible place. It really isn't for everyone. So there are other avenues that are just as valid to engage. So you can submit or sign on to a written testimony. So that is typically submitted to the committee's secretary, and each committee member is supposed to get a copy of that written testimony. So that's another way where you can submit your testimony. You can call or write letters to your representatives. Representatives or legislators love receiving letters because they don't receive enough of them. And it really is just like an easy way for them to hear from their constituents. And I believe with testimony and letters sent to legislators, that has to go like on the official record that they received this feedback. And then other avenues include also direct action, some demonstrations, mutual aid, or just like other ways of just non-legislative expression. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what lobbying in Georgia looks like because it's kind of unique. I'm not 100% sure if other states have this same process, not that I've heard of, but Georgia does something called lobbying on the ropes. And when we think of lobbying, particularly from like a community perspective, we're thinking of like having like scheduled meetings with legislators and you and your group like going in and like having these meetings. And I'll actually talk a bit about like what those lobbying meetings typically look like, and we'll actually practice that. But in Georgia, how lobbying on the ropes works is you appear in person at the Capitol. So you'll either go to the House side or the Senate side, just depending on like, where the bill is, what you're advocating for. You're given a little slip of paper, which basically you're supposed to note like your name, maybe if you're with like an organization, your address. That's really important if you want to speak to your legislator specifically. And then you put down, I want to talk to this legislator about this. You also note like which legislator you want to come out, because lobbying sorry, I just think this is always like such a ridiculous process. It's really funny to me. So outside of the assembly chambers are literally these velvet ropes that divides the entrances to the chambers and the public. So the public is behind, it's like a line of people just kind of all clamored in there. And they're really just there to talk to their legislators. That's how we lobby here in Georgia. So like I said, you get a slip of paper from a very nice secretary who's also sitting out there. You complete the information and you give it to a page. And these pages, I don't know if they brought back the pages actually. They paused that program for due to COVID, but I'm not so sure if they brought that back. But these pages are typically just like elementary, middle school children, high school too, I think, who are granted the day off of school to come to the Capitol and help out. So you hand it to the children and they run into the chamber, give the slip to the legislator that you want to speak to, and request for those legislators to come out of the chambers to speak with you. So legislators can either come out once they're summoned. They can be like, wait, I'll come out in like a minute because we're talking about this issue or something like that. Or they can straight up say, no, I don't want to talk to them. Sometimes they're not there, which is valid. Like the kid will come back and be like, oh, they weren't at their seat. During 481, there was actually a legislator, I can't even remember who it was. We sent the page in there and they came out and like a cute little 10-year-old kid. And he was like, oh, he told me to tell you he wasn't here. So sometimes legislators can straight up just like say no and not want to speak to you. Yeah. You would hope because you are their constituent that they will come out to speak to you, but sometimes for various reasons, they just don't want to do with that. So lobbying on the ropes has its benefits in that you don't have to go through the process of like scheduling a meeting with a representative who is typically like very, very busy. But lobbying on the ropes is also like kind of chaotic in that you have to have like a really, really like tight pitch, because again, there are like other people around you who are just like clamoring to talk to some other legislator and stuff like that. It can get a bit like wild, honestly. So you really have to come with a quick pitch. It can kind of look like a condensed version of like a legislator meeting, but it really is just like a quick, I came to talk to you about this. Will you vote to support or will you vote against this bill? Typically with that conversation, you're really trying to get a yes or no or some kind of promise from this legislator to take a particular action. Sometimes they'll be clear about that. Other times they'll be just like squirrely, or I'm still thinking about it, things like that. This is also an opportunity to give them information, to tell your own personal stories, things like that. So this is, again, a pretty unique process to Georgia as far as I know. It's not my favorite way of engaging with legislators because, again, very, very chaotic. But it does provide, I guess, more relative accessibility to representatives because you don't have to schedule a meeting. So I'm going to talk a good deal about legislator meetings. So this is sort of like the traditional way of lobbying when it comes to like organizations lobbying around their issue areas, or even just like community members. In other states or even in Congress, you will like just set a meeting with the legislator and have a meeting about your issue. So I'm just going to go through like kind of like the steps of what this legislator meeting looks like, because you will have the opportunity to kind of like practice this after lunch. So before you even go into the meeting, you want to agree on your goals, your roles, and your asks. So what are your goals for this meeting? Are you trying to get some kind of promise from the legislator? Are you trying to see where they stand on a particular issue? You really want to establish those goals before going in, like what makes the most sense for your campaign, things like that. You want to agree on roles. I'll talk a bit about like the different roles of a legislator meeting. But if you're going in with a group of people, it's really, really helpful if you assign roles to each individual for the meeting. And I'll talk a bit about like what those roles are. And then your asks. Your asks can be like, will you commit to defunding crisis pregnancy centers in Georgia? Or will you commit to addressing this issue in your district? Things like that. You want to research before. So yes, of course, research the issue, but you also want to research the legislator. You want to know like how they voted in the past. You want to know some of the issues they care about. You want to know like their background, all of these other things. We call this process power mapping because we want to know who is connected with this legislator or what this legislator connects to, because it can be very helpful in swaying them in a particular direction. So for 481, we found out like what church a particular legislator went to. Not to like go and like address them at the church, but really to find like other like members of the church to maybe speak to them as well. We find out about like their spouses and like what they care about and things like that, because sometimes you may want to like talk to their spouse and be like, hey, your spouse is about to do some terrible things in the legislature, and you're like, as a doctor, maybe you would care about this, so maybe speak to your spouse or something like that, you know. So you really want to do your research on the person you're talking to. So you send that meeting request to a legislator's office. I don't know if I haven't included it in the resource folder. I'll do that later. Just like a template for what like that email can look like dear Senator so-and-so, I would love to talk to you about this specific issue. Do you have time to meet with me and my organization or other concerned community members about this issue? And then once you set that meeting, you can plan and strategize the meeting agenda. So how do you want the conversation to go? When you're in that meeting, you're in control, right? Your group is in control. The legislator is there because they're paid to listen to you and your issues. So it's really helpful if you come in with an agenda and you want to know exactly what you want to talk about. You rehearse and you review your plan. And then finally, that's when you meet with the legislator. You have the meeting that you've rehearsed, you're ready for, you're saying all of like these points, you're appealing to their emotions and all of these things because you researched them. And then once the meeting is over, you leave behind any information you have. So it could be like a one pager on the issue, some data, facts, things like that. You leave that behind so they can have it for their own reference. You're gonna wanna like debrief after the meeting just to get like with your group, just to get an idea of like how it went. You know, was the legislator being a jerk? Like maybe you can vent about that, things like that. But you always want to follow up. That's one of the most important things, especially as it pertains to building relationships with legislators, is to follow up with them and be like, hey, I'm just following up with you. I'm Agbo. You met me when we came into your office and talked about this issue. We talked about these points. Just wanted to follow up with some additional information, especially if the legislator did have questions you couldn't address in the meeting. And yeah, you really just say thank you again for meeting with us. More information. Hope that you, whatever the issue, hope that you agree with us or something like that. So I'm going to talk a bit about like what those meeting roles look like. Again, before you go into this meeting, you may want to assign roles in your groups. It really helps the meeting go smoother and make sure that you're really getting the information you need from the legislator for your own purposes. So the lead notifies the legislator's staff that the group has arrived. So the lead person, they'll be in the front. Hey, we're from, I'll just say, we're from Spark Reproductive Justice Now. We have an appointment with so-and-so legislator. Are they still available to speak with us? And they may provide like a business card for Spark, or maybe like a Spark brochure or something like that. Once you're able to meet with the legislator or the legislator's staff person, I think we typically see that more in Congress. State level, they're a bit more accessible, but sometimes you're just meeting with like their staff person, like their chief of staff or someone like that. The intros person, they open the meeting. They're like, oh, thank you so much for meeting with us. We are Spark Reproductive Justice Now. How long again do you have for us to meet? Oh, 15 minutes. Perfect. We can do that. Then they lead the group in introductions. Everyone goes around and introduces themselves. It really is just like a great way to kind of commit yourselves to memory to the legislator, especially since you're going to follow up later. The person who's doing the introduction also tells the staff or legislator about the group and why you're there. The note taker. So this person takes notes throughout the meeting. They write down what the legislator agrees/disagrees with, general conversation, and then writes down any like follow-up questions. Like say there is, say you're advocating for an issue and the legislator has a question about the issue that you do not know the answer to, that is completely valid. Like we care about an issue doesn't mean we're experts on it. You never want to lie to a legislator. You never want to like BS an answer or something like that. You can really just say, that's a great question. I will follow up with you about that, and then go find that information. So the note taker would write down whatever follow-up questions the legislator might have. The issue areas person. So that's the person who will actually be doing a bulk of the talking during the meeting. They'll tell the legislator or like the staff representative about the issue or the bill. They'll ask if the member is already a supporter or co-sponsor, they'll thank them. So if we've seen that in the past, a particular legislator, for example, voted against funding CPCs, we can thank them for their efforts there, and just highlight, so this is an issue that we know that you care about. If they're not a supporter or a co-sponsor, or they don't know what the heck you're talking about, You tell them why you support the bill, how the issue impacts you, kind of give them like a crash course on the issue or the bill. And then sometimes you might want to talk about, like, tell them what you've done in your community around the issue. Like maybe that'll be an opportunity to present like a petition. Like, we have this petition of community members who are outraged that there are 12 CPCs in your district or something like that, right? So just giving facts about the issue, you're basically educating them about it. Because legislators, with all of like their successes and expertise and things like that, they don't know everything. And you're coming in as an expert on your own experiences and talking about the issue. So it's really an opportunity to educate them. The person who provides examples. So they tell the legislator and staff, and the person who's actually doing the issue areas can also provide the examples. These roles, actually, no, I'll pause till the, I'll put a pin in that for the end. So the person who does the examples, they tells the legislators and or the staff person like what's happening in their district around the issue area. So they'll be the ones to like say, we have 12 CPCs in our district alone. They have put themselves next to actual abortion clinics. They have tried to lure people away from abortion clinics. Like, we have video of this happening, things like that. Or, oh, we have screenshots from CPC websites of them straight up lying about the services they offer. Telling people that they are clinics, or telling people that you can reverse an abortion pill, things like that. So providing like those actual examples, that data, and how the issue is impacting your community, that person would provide that. The questions person, they lead the question dialogue between like the group and the legislator or the staffer. So the questions person can ask, where do you see yourself on this issue? They can say something along the lines of, I know your office hasn't voiced support or co-sponsored. Can you tell us why it's not a priority? What's the best way to work with your office on this issue? So when you create like your agenda and you're planning for the meeting, you come up with those questions beforehand. You want to make sure that you are hitting, that you are getting as much information as possible from this legislator, and getting as many like promises as possible from this legislator, because the note taker is noting what the legislator agrees to. And if they do something different later, that's something that you can amplify and be like, what happened? I thought we were cool. I thought you were going to do this. Like, why did you say one thing and do another? Right. Or that's something you can also just amplify to your base. Like, oh, this legislator said that they're actually going to support our issue. Yay. Right. Once you leave that meeting. And then there's a person that can close things out. We may review any things that require follow-up and thank them for their time. You always want to be polite and thank them for taking the time to listen to you. And then you want to assign someone to follow up and send that email to the legislator. So I know that was a lot. I will say that more than one person can do a particular role. Or a person can have more than one role, just depending on the size of your group or just how folks want to interact in that space. These roles aren't like written in stone, like they can fluctuate. There are other roles that I could have mentioned, like someone could be assigned to like take a picture of the whole group. Like, I know when we would go to DC, and lobby with the late Representative John Lewis, always there would be a picture. There will always be a picture. So you may assign someone to take a picture of the group, of your lobby day on the Hill, things like that. What other things could you do? Oh, you could assign someone to actually like provide like the leave behind information. So you can assign someone to like give like your legislator a folder of information about your issue. What else? Yeah, and maybe you'll have like a videographer if they are willing to have like the meeting put on video or things like that. So yeah, there are other roles you might want to assign just based on your particular strategy. Questions? How am I doing on time? Oh, I'm a little over, but I anticipated that. Questions, comments, and I'll stop sharing my screen. Have videos of these meetings been shared as snippets on social media? So more likely on the ropes, when we're lobbying on the ropes, you're more likely to be able to get like a video of a legislator interaction or meeting. I'm always going to refer to 481. I'm sorry, that was just a time in Georgia. During 481, there were various just like clips shared on social media. I think there's a clip somewhere where I'm straight up arguing with my representative at the time, who there was a back and forth. There was definitely a back and forth. And I remember, because I was a baby organizer, like, why would you do this to me? He was just like not hearing us on the issue. And I was like, well, we'll remember this come like, election day. And he was like, I hope you do, things like that. So I think that was taped. There was one where it was a bunch of just like young people from I think Georgia State, some college. They came to speak to a particular legislator. I can't remember his name. It's this guy from Athens, I think. And they were just hitting him with facts and facts and facts. And you can like just see him, like, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, like that music, like you can see, like you could hear that music playing in the background because he just like looked like kind of overwhelmed, like I didn't expect my constituents to actually talk to me. So yeah, those are like videos you can share as well. It's really, really helpful if you can get a video of them agreeing to support a bill or have a specific or stating their specific position on a specific issue. Oh, I will put them in the folder. Apologies, I don't know how. I forgot to put that in there.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was great. I was wondering, you mentioned that the governor can either sign or not do anything for a bill to pass. So I was wondering if signing is more of like a publicity stunt, or like when does the governor choose like which path to choose?
I will say signing means that the governor is like just firmly in support of the bill and they want to show that they're in support of the bill. Any bill that like a governor has specifically championed, like the 6-week abortion ban, Kemp definitely like signed that bill because that was the one that he was actually like in the like behind the scenes moving legislators and like advocating for this bill to be passed. So something like that they'll sign. A bill that they just decide to do nothing on is probably typically just like a bill they don't want to have be part of, I guess, of their legacy. They don't want to have any like not they don't it's not like they don't want to have anything to do with the bill. It's more like they just don't want to show that they have a particular position on that issue. I can't think of any specific examples of like a recent governor like not doing anything. But yeah, typically for that, it's really they don't want to express a position. I feel like more during election years, you'll see that where they're not going to say yay or nay to a bill. They're just going to let it pass silently. right? I think it really just depends on like whatever strategically for themselves they want to do. All right, I know we are past time and I definitely want to like respect y'all's lunchtime. So we are going to pause for lunch and I will give y'all the full 30 minutes. Maybe we'll just like reconvene at 12:40 instead. And once we reconvene, we're actually going to do some practice conversations and break out into groups to kind of have like these lobbying conversations specifically about CPCs. So in the resource folder, I'll explain it after we come back. Let me let y'all eat. So please go eat, nourish yourselves. We will return at 12:40 because I like round numbers. And yeah. Please rejoin at 12:40 and I'll put that in the chat as well.